Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2 Writer's Room. I'm Charlie.
And I am Colin, and it is the free Ross. Ross is freed, motherfuckers
Out,
edition.
baby.
Huge news this week.
Yeah.
Massive dub for the boys.
Yeah, there were many dubs. Whether you're a state cuck and you like the state to add Bitcoin to your balance sheet, as Casey says, spit in my mouth, daddy. Or if you enjoy regulatory clarity, you can have that too. But if you're a true OG cypherpunk, then cypherpunk libertarian, then Ross getting out of getting his full pardon is like the thing to celebrate. So many of us are here because of Ross, and here it is. Here's the picture. If you're watching this is on stream. Free_Ross, the account that I believe his wife or his mom runs. Picture of him with a beautiful little house plant. House plant, not a cell plant.
The plant makes this for me because it shows you every little shred of humanity that you have to cultivate in a situation like that, where you are in max lockdown penitentiary situation. And yet this is Ross with I assume the on his back is a bag full of stuff that he brought into prison. This is him the night of being released. Pretty quick turnaround. It seems like Trump signed the pardon and then he was released within a few hours. Wasn't quite on day one, but we'll take day two. I'm sure Ross isn't necessarily griping about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I am pretty strict that it was very clear it was either day 1 or 24 hours. Both of those passed. But the thing is, this, I consider this a sticking to your promises. The new President Trump has not just commuted but full pardoned Ross's sentence, and he is out. So we don't care that it happened only a few hours later. Ross is out and he's free, and he's actually been already publicly communicating. He did a video. We won't do this video, but like he's TLDR is like, I want to get out there and talk about freedom and stuff. But Colin and I are going to talk about how we got here. I'll think a lot of the personality of all the weird internet esotericisms, all the stories underneath the darknet market, even just like the user experiences themselves. They stand, they're almost lost to time. You can see some of these preserved in like firsthand accounts and in comments on the internet, but like it's kind of hard to collate these. So Colin and I we're gonna talk about this, and
this is the story of the Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht, the founder of it, the man, the myth, and the marketplace that really thrust Bitcoin into the spotlight early on. And I think, to your point, it is kind of a lost art, I should say, navigating these dark web marketplaces for the average Bitcoiner. That's not to say that all of us should be going on to Tor browser and buying ecstasy off of Empire or something like that, right? But it is to say that I think that what the Silk Road represents is really the salad days of Bitcoin that were grimy, underground, fuck the man. And you had guys basically buying Bitcoin the first time so that they could do things like buy drugs off the dark web. They were learning PGP encryption, all of these cypherpunk tools that really laid the bedrock of the more anarcho-capitalist side of the Bitcoin movement, which have really been overshadowed by the number go up, Austro-libertarian view of sound money. They go hand in hand, and there's like a Venn diagram, I should say, rather, where they intersect. But I do think that there's something to be said about this is a kind of relic of an older culture in Bitcoin that is much less representative of the actual dominant Bitcoin culture as it was 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because the number one voice in Bitcoin today, like Michael Saylor, talks about supercharged money. It can't be altered. It's very much centered on Bitcoin, the asset. But if you look at the writings of Dread Pirate Roberts, and we assume that Ross wrote all or most of the DPR comments,
at least some of it. That was a pseudonym that was used by allegedly Ross, but also other people might have had access to the
Exactly. We don't know, but we know that like the DPR, and use this for Dread Pirate Ops, the pseudonym of the lead, the head of the Silk Road, um, spoke a lot about libertarian things. It was a very, very libertarian focused tone, and Bitcoin was I like to say it was like a tool or an instrument of the libertarian ideal, but it was a tool just as much as other things such as PGP and Tor and other types of privacy and cryptography components. Like, these are all things which were put together to deliver really the first modern and most well-known darknet marketplace. So where do you want to
I think,
start?
yeah, I think we'll just start with the high level flash history of what happened. So Ross Ulbricht founded the Silk Road in February 2011. Bitcoin was still relatively obscure at the time. It was kind of the domain of garage shop hobbyists who were on Bitcoin Talk and things of that nature, and the cypherpunk mailing list, playing around, mining. There were very few markets at that point for Bitcoin. Mt. Gox was around in 2011. I don't know if it was founded before or after the Silk Road. But Ross founds the Silk Road, and it runs until October 2nd, 2013, when he is arrested in the science fiction section of a library, I believe in San Francisco, by the FBI. He was distracted by a lover's quarrel
Yeah, it
that
was
some
like a
agents set
big
up.
sting operation.
Yeah.
Like, they set up a whole distraction, grabbed his laptop so he couldn't like remote turn it off, and so yeah.
Yeah. And then that was the end of it. And the Silk Road shut down October 2nd, 2013. Then if you tried to access it, you'd get that little placard that says this site has been seized by the FBI, US authorities, yada, yada. And then Ross is convicted in 2015 to a double life in prison plus 40-year sentence without the possibility of parole for money laundering, computer hacking, conspiracy to traffic fraudulent identity documents, and conspiracy to traffic narcotics by the means of the internet. And obviously, fast forward to this week, I believe it was on Tuesday, President Trump issued him a full pardon, didn't commute his sentence, a full pardon. So he is clean slate from those crimes. Now, there's a lot that we can say about whether or not it was a heavy-handed sentence, whether or not he deserved what he got. The general consensus among Bitcoiners, and I don't want to like opine on this too much because I feel like it's been talked about a lot, but the general consensus is that he was kind of this sacrificial lamb on the altar of the US justice system, because this is a form of crime that had never been seen before. I mean, crime on the internet, identity theft, all these things were obviously in play before the Silk Road, but using a decentralized permissionless cryptocurrency to facilitate illicit trade over the internet had never been done before. And so they felt like they needed to, I guess, make an example of him accordingly.
Yeah, and
And
I think it'd be good to, to be very clear that like I think cool anarchist stuff is pretty fun, but like this is creating a marketplace to sell stuff that's illegal and many would argue harmful to society and to the individuals. We're not going to get too much into that. Ross was hit with the kingpin charge, which is where they do the whole money laundering thing. You got to have five people working under you. Other people that were hit with the kingpin charge are the Pablo Escobars of the world. So you look at like the Pablo archetype and the Ross archetype, and they are very mismatched. In fact, I don't know if it's even clear that Ross had 5 people working under him, which is kind of the threshold. But
right.
and the other thing is like Ross, under the DPR pseudonym, was very elaborate. They elaborated a lot about his intentions and mindset, and it could not be a paint a much different picture than that of a drug lord. And so the Free Ross movement, has been very much motivated by the symbology of freeing this person who was unfairly targeted and sentenced. Maybe not absolving him of saying it is good or justified to run a marketplace, but rather to say something's wrong. He's the symbol of it, and we need to like rally around this purpose to get him out.
Yeah, and I think this is really bears highlighting. I said we were not going to talk about this, but I
We
guess
did. Here
have
we are.
to. Yeah, talk about it. Yeah, the kingpin charge is something that's usually reserved for actual kingpins within crime syndicates or gangs, as Charlie pointed out. Pablo Escobar, the notorious and infamous Colombian drug lord. But the big difference between Ross and guys like that is, the Silk Road was not a marketplace for child porn, for hits or assassination markets. It briefly sold guns, but
It
then
was
they
shut down
stopped.
because it wasn't very effective at doing that.
Yeah, because they don't really. I mean, quite frankly, like most guys selling guns probably just want to like meet in a Walmart parking lot somewhere and then exchange cash under the table. Like, there's not a huge problem with that. Like selling guns is not illegal in the US as long as it's not a certain type of gun, right? So it was not that effective. But I think the point just, deserves to be highlighted that this was a marketplace for, illegal substances like drugs, but it wasn't for anything that would cause direct harm to anyone except for maybe the person taking the drugs. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out, and we'll just kind of jump into this, it wasn't just drugs that you could buy
There's like a bunch of random stuff
on the
too.
Silk Road. Yeah, like in this screenshot that I found online for those watching on stream, like there's Michael Jackson's discography from 1971 to
It's probably like
2009.
a copyright thing, you know?
Yeah. And then you look at like the other categories, right? Obviously, drugs is like there's like 1,500 listings from whenever this screenshot was taken. Most of that's cannabis. A lot of it is other things like psychedelics and prescriptions. But you have apparel, you have books, you have computer equipment, digital
Home
goods.
and garden
Um,
category.
there's erotica, like there's fireworks, there's food. Um, yeah, the home and garden's hilarious. I think
Books.
this kind of is
Books.
one of the
There's a good one, like banned books.
yeah. And this is kind of something that's overlooked. Obviously, the majority of the transaction volume is for drugs. I'm not trying to make the revisionist claim that the Silk Road was like Amazon and you just wanted to buy a copy of, Noam Chomsky's Necessary Illusions. But you could buy other things on here and people used it for other things. And part of the reason why it was so successful for especially a number of drugs was the reputation system and the carefully curated nature of the site. I think this is something that's also somewhat overlooked with
Because
people
that's
who
pretty
don't know how the
standard
Silk Road
today.
works.
Yeah, it's pretty standard today. We have people like, consumer facing markets know you want reviews from real people, but this was actually still a little innovative for the early 2010s for online commerce. Like I think
Yeah.
Amazon reviews were still kind of like a normal thing. It was really just on eBay, people reviewing sellers. And so this was still kind of a cutting edge product, like consumer facing feature.
Yeah, and you could go and you would click on allegedly
Allegedly.
you would click on a seller and then that seller would have feedback and ratings. And you could click on specific products that seller was marketing and you could look at what the ratings were for that. So like right here it's for recent feedback for different sellers. You'd have like feedback like 5 out of 5 stars, AAA, next day shipping for the win. Wunderbar, I haven't tried, but looks like it'll do the trick nicely. Ordered on Friday, received Monday, extremely professional. And I think this is something that's an underappreciated feature of these online marketplaces, especially in the age of fentanyl. Like this was not as much of a problem back then, but now you hear stories of people overdosing on drugs like cocaine that are cut with fentanyl, right? And with these marketplaces, one of the great things is you can actually quality control some of the stuff that you're buying. Now, there are some people who are listening who are like, well, you just shouldn't be buying the drugs at all, bro. And it's like, well, yeah, sure. But like people are going to buy the drugs. I would rather them be buying the drugs in a way that can ensure that they're not going to randomly OD on a fatal substance like fentanyl.
So okay, so Silk Road is live, and it's got this like broad marketplace component to it. It begins to like gain suppliers and sellers and a really wide, robust network of people who are using it. And uh, there's a few things we could touch on here. We could talk about like the scale of it. I think you've got some numbers, Colin. But
Yeah.
then also like how does a user even find out that this exists? That is an equally interesting conversation. But let's do the numbers just on like how
Yeah,
big it was.
the numbers are interesting. So I want to share my tab again. So for those of you who are on audio, apologize for this. If you're listening to this the next after we publish this is a live stream. We publish this on our RSS. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple, etc., you can go over to YouTube or our X account and you can see all of this on the stream, an actual video. But I have this chart of a Bitcoin price during Silk Road's lifespan. The source for this market data is from Coinmetrics. And you can see there's a little arrow at the far left of the chart in February 2011 when the Silk Road launches. And you can see this bump in 2011 when I would argue use of it really takes off. I mean, I really do think there's a good argument to be made here that the first bull run that Bitcoin saw in 2011 was almost exclusively the result of people buying Bitcoin for the dark web and then people FOMOing in as a result. There's obviously nothing to prove that, but this was arguably Bitcoin's first commercial use case and its first clearly demonstrated use case, online commerce that is uncensorable. And I still think to this day, the Silk Road and dark web marketplaces are actually the perfect example of why Bitcoin matters in the sense of like it is money that they cannot censor. And
Yeah,
that's
and
why
so
it is endured, I think, as such such an important symbol of Bitcoin.
it's wild how early this was because 2011, right? Satoshi leaves in 2010. Around 2010, it's like a year and a half after Bitcoin is live. You have WikiLeaks start to take donations. It draws attention, but it wasn't like the exchange of commerce. So it was surprising how quickly like the commerce component took off. You had other things. You had like some little like gambling, Satoshi Dice around this
Yeah.
time, but like these are all novelties, whereas the Silk Road was a very explicitly like this is the utility of Bitcoin. It is a money that can be exchanged outside of the state permissionlessly
Yep. It
within 2 years, and it's crazy. And so
really is.
it comes out, and it's also like now I look at how people developers build things these days, and it's hard. And I'm thinking back to like pre like Bitcoin libraries and wallets and like server software, like man, it's quite an undertaking to like build a whole platform with a under this kind of context. Again, it was a small amount of people who touched this, as far as we know, the almost the entirety of it being Ross.
Yeah, and it seems almost mythical, and I think it kind of is for a lot of Bitcoiners in
Yeah.
terms of what this marketplace meant at the time and how small of an ecosystem it still was. But anyway, fast forwarding, I wanted to show when it launched versus when it was shut down. Fast forwarding to October 2nd, 2013, you can see on the chart, it's kind of hard to see because it's Bitcoin's going parabolic, but you can see that the price retraces from about like 125 down to almost $100 when it shut down. But then what this chart cuts off is actually the rest of 2023 when Bitcoin just absolutely blows its load up to $1,000.
The November run up to 1100. That was
Yeah, it's insane. But anyway, so I wanted to show that chart, and then I wanted to share just a few little data points from the first few years of the Silk Road. So this is according to ChatGPT. I'm sorry, I did not pull the numbers myself, but I was asking it for revenue figures, and it said the Silk Road. This is according to I think FBI documents when they were prosecuting the case against Ulbricht. The Silk Road reportedly facilitated 1.2 million transactions between 150,000 buyers and 4,000 vendors during its operation from February 2011 to October 2013. Pretty crazy. The total revenue over this period was estimated to be around 9.5 million BTC. Insane. Equivalent to roughly 1.2 billion USD at the average Bitcoin price during the site's activity. Now, I want to clarify that is revenue for all actors on the site. That's not the Silk Road's revenue, but $1.2 billion in commerce over, 3 or 2.5 years is pretty wild. The annual revenue per year for the Silk Road is estimated to be between 1.2 to 2 million USD in 2011. In 2012, it's estimated to be 15 to 45 million. And then in 2013, it's estimated to be between 22 million and 65 million. So you can really see, if that chart that I just showed didn't drive home in terms of the adoption, you can really see the Silk Road's user base grow over its 2.5-year time span.
Yeah.
And the commission was roughly 8 to 15% on each transaction. And Ross Ulbricht's wallet was found to contain approximately 144,000 Bitcoin, all of which was seized by the US government, worth about 28.5 million USD at the time of his arrest. That is just an absolutely incredible sum of money that today would be worth
Close to what the US is going to put in our strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Holy shit, dude. This would be worth, am I reading this right? $15.17 billion.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. So it's interesting because as I said before, there's a forum side of Silk Road. And it's kind of what you would expect if you have a bunch of like tweaked out, geeked out, like weird internet people all chatting, on a forum hyped up. It's much like the forums of today. It's just that that these people are absolutely, quivering over their amphetamine use. And the thing is, like, the subject of these forums was like mostly like conspiracy or like freaking out about vendors or like rumors and saying this person's, rugging users. They didn't use the term back then, but like, um, uh, but there's a really interesting side to this forum, the Silk Road forums, which was like the libertarian and anarcho-capitalism conversations, which I before we went live, I was comparing it to like it's almost like you get to listen to like the settlers of the American frontier huddle around a fire in the middle of the wilderness and swap high level high level like pontifications about like the nature of sovereignty and freedom. And yes, you've got some crazy prospectors huddled around the fire too, but you really do get to see that these people are not just here for money. It is like they could go make money back at home. They're here for a reason. And it's hard, and so it's hard to like discern who's who, but like DPR has a lot of classic bangers um and it's just great. It is refreshing because I don't hear this in like the Bitcoin circles that much anymore. No, mostly it's about monetary stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And it is interesting and makes sense that the Silk Road was not just a marketplace, but a hub for discussion, much like a bazaar in real life, right?
Yeah.
You'll hear lots of different conversations from multiple different people from all walks of life. And it is kind of the hardcore, anarcho-capitalist alternative to like Bitcoin talk in a way. Like this is where you would have conversations that would be Bitcoin talk adjacent, but maybe take it a little bit of a step further. And forums are how these dark web markets did and still live and breathe and die. Like if you want to go access a dark web market today, you got to know which forum to go to get the Tor address and to figure out which ones are actually reputable, right?
Yeah, like this is a good segue into like how did a user back then and still is today? How do you figure out that it exists and then go use it? This is not a Silk Road cookbook we are giving you. This is more of we are reflecting and sharing tales from
friends that we know
from
who allegedly
from Swim, someone who isn't me. It's a common acronym.
But yeah, I mean, you had to be on your toes and figure out what was actually real and what wasn't. And when you're accessing these markets, they would constantly be bouncing between server to server. So you would have like multiple different mirror links, right? So like you might use one URL through Tor. You have to use Tor browser to access any of these. You would use one URL one day, and then the next day you couldn't access it from that URL, so you had to use another one. And all of these things were built on reputation and trust, right? Like you had to have your PGP key to actually sign and read messages. Everything was totally encrypted, like all of the correspondence and everything like that. And maybe this bears saying here at this point, because I think one of the casualties of the Silk Road was the fact that if a dark web market like lasts for longer than a year, that's a really good run,
Yeah.
because like the, the community that used the Silk Road, if we can call it a community, let's just say the proprietors of the Silk Road really lost something when it got taken down, because now you're kind of playing on this merry-go-round of new dark web markets every week, like flavor of the week for the dark web.
Exactly.
And these
Every
things are
single
either pulled because they're shut down by the U.S. government and or government officials in the hosted country, or a lot of them have rugged their users. Well, they'll get a user base going, because all of these wallets are like, unless it's done the right way, they're hosted by the website, right? So like sometimes, I mean, I actually, that's a good question. I don't know how the wallets
I
work
actually
on Silk.
don't know what the current modern implementation is. I know they tend to prefer Monero over Bitcoin these days.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
beside the point, um, like, uh, you I lost my train of thought. You keep going.
Well, I'm just curious, like, because you always see these rug stories of like a dark web market shutting down
Oh,
and then
yeah.
taking everyone's
What
Bitcoin.
I was gonna say that, like, after the Silk Road was really the only dark net market that anybody used, and then it got shut down, and within weeks, there was a Silk Road 2.0, I think was actually the literal name of it. But
Yes.
then, over the following years, you just saw a Cambrian explosion of all of these Silk Road forks. The meta was known, the people wanted it, and, every single one, was shut down. As you said, they were either just a honeypot or they turned into a honeypot, or someone started out of noble intentions or or just business intentions. And then, if there's one guy who controls the wallet and eventually the wallet for the marketplace is filling up and it's that several million, the carrot is too great
Yeah,
for
100%.
you to grab it. So like this, it's just never been the same, man.
It's never been the same. And I guess I should have done my homework a little bit better on this, but I suppose they're stealing it from the escrow, right? So like the way these markets work
Yeah.
is, you as the user, you will pay into an escrow that is brokered by the site operator. And
Yeah.
then once you report that you have received your shipment from them, then it is released from escrow and the seller gets paid. But
Yep.
all that being said, to Charlie's point, the Silk Road's legacy lives on. There are a number of markets that are active today, that are still actively, buying or featuring wares that are illicit across a bunch of different countries. Interestingly enough, kind of a side note, and then maybe we can hop into the downfall of the Silk Road, because I think this
Yeah.
is a pretty important part of the story. I think a lot of the cannabis selling on current dark web markets is actually legal weed that is then resold through the dark web. I have no way to prove this, but I remember I was going to the post office to ship something when I was in Denver, and I saw a guy walk in with like 2 dozen, I mean, freaking like, eighth sized boxes under his arm, and he had like a beanie on. He looked absolutely blitzed out. And I was sitting there thinking, it's like, I guarantee you this dude is going to his local pot shop and purchasing eighths and then selling them on the dark web for like a 10, 15, 20% markup. Wouldn't be surprised.
It's just good business. Okay,
um, yeah.
so what happens at some point, and you may want to share details what you've got, but like at some point, like the authorities say, "Oh, we got to shut this down." So they start
Yeah.
working on it, and the FBI is involved, and cyber crimes is on it, and they basically find a couple points to track down. They find like a place where Ross left an email address associated with him somewhere, and then it's just a matter of time for them to figure out exactly how to
Yeah.
get in.
So the timeline is somewhat fuzzy here. Funnily enough, on the FBI's website, they say on January 27th, 2011, I guess right before it launched, a tax agent discovered a post about the website on an online forum. So what's interesting is like the FBI conceivably had their nose on this case from the get-go. Obviously, it took them a while to get there, but by the time that they were trying to shut it down, the Silk Road Marketplace had swelled from like 10,000 accounts in 2012 to 1 million at its peak. Now, that's not necessarily all unique users, but that's still an incredible footprint for how many people were using this. So, what happened in 2013? A Silk Road administrator, because at this point, Ross had staff. He was paying like 50 grand a month for security. He had staff under him to manage payment flows, escrow, support desk help, all that kind of stuff. One of the administrators, a man named Curtis Clark Green, was arrested for cocaine possession. This is taken verbatim from an article I wrote for Bitcoin Magazine in 2019. Undercover agents got their hands on the first human link to the site when he was arrested. The head of the task force that arrested Green, Carl Force, took over Green's account and used the pseudonym Knob to speak to Dread Pirate Roberts via Silk Road's private chat. And he used Green as an informant. Now, here is where the whole story takes a dark turn. And this is where Ross has been accused by officials of trying to order an assassination against Green. And we're going to get into what that means and why he was never actually charged for that crime, which I think tells the whole story.
Yeah.
But masquerading as a member of a drug cartel, Knob, again, this is Carl Force, the agent who is masquerading as Green, told DPR that he had mucked up a cocaine sale by accident, sending it to Green. Knob asked Dread Pirate Roberts if he needed help rectifying the situation with Green. Though DPR was hesitant at first, he eventually took Knob up on the offer, first by asking him to rough Green up so he'd cough up the funds he stole, then by ordering his assassination. Agent Force, still posing as Knob, faked a torture scene in a Salt Lake Marriott and forged Green's death. The price tag for the job was $80,000 in Bitcoin. Now, backing up, because that makes it sound like Ross Ulbricht just tried to get a guy killed. Now, here's where it gets complicated. There's no way to prove that Ross was using DPR for that communication. In fact, the man who was supposedly ordered to be assassinated, Green, was on a podcast years later saying that multiple people had access to the DPR handle, including himself. So he's like, if I had access to it, who else had access to it? Now, a number of other problems here. We have no idea if the FBI is telling the truth about the sequence of events here. As far as I know from the court documents, a lot of this communication was withheld or redacted or sealed under the documents for evidence were sealed. So some of the claims are that agents basically planted this, or that an agent himself had appropriated the DPR handle and was communicating with another agent. The other thing that is also said is that the FBI forged these correspondence after the fact so that they could try to charge Ross with an attempt of murder. Importantly, Ross was never convicted of, nor even charged, nor even tried for trying to commit murder. So I think that's one of those things where, honestly, when I wrote this article, I wish I could go back with what I know now, because I would have treated this section differently.
It's also important to put into context. Like, look at the FBI agents the one in particular who was most involved in this. He was a chaotic motherfucker. Like, this guy was arrested for cocaine possession, not like because he seized it, because he was just on it.
Yeah.
And you look at his methodology and like the people around him, if I can remember correctly, like they actually look like the bad guys.
Yeah, and to your point, so Carl Force, the guy who was communicating with the DPR handle allegedly for the assassination, and Sean Bridges, a Secret Service agent, were later convicted of stealing Bitcoin related to the case.
Yeah, one of them was extorted, I think, either Ross himself or people on the platform. One of them was actually actively extorting vendors on the platform, and the other, grabbed some that was just sitting around, and for themselves. So, some of the good guys.
Yeah, some of the agents in here were obviously corrupt. The Ulbricht's defense said, hey, by the way, Silk Road servers were seized before the prosecution took place, and they could have been tampered with and likely were tampered with. I think there was evidence for that in the trial as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just put that segment in there because I think when this gets shared within mainstream circles, and I know we're not talking to a mainstream circle, we're talking to a bunch of, you know, Bitcoiners who live and
Yeah.
breathe this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, this is the thing that people will see, and they'll say, "Oh, Donald Trump pardoned the guy who tried to get someone killed," and then there were like claims that like 8 more assassination attempts or hits were ordered, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
I actually didn't look into that and see who it was for, but none of that ended up making it into the case. And so, like at this point, after Green got compromised, one thing led to another, and eventually the FBI homed in on Ross in that science fiction section of the library, took the laptop that he was using to work on for the Silk Road, and then the rest is history. He was apprehended, arrested, and sentenced to jail. Sentenced to prison, I should say.
Yeah. So there's some other things about like Ross's case, like he wasn't really allowed to defend himself in a way which is like what we expect in a court setting. And then, you know, we've talked about Ross this whole time. I want to like shout out because like Ross was in jail for 11 years while his mother Lynn basically pivoted from like Ross's mom to basically teaching herself and figuring out how to navigate this unwinnable game of bureaucracy, public advocating, and dealing with all the crazy Bitcoiners while the price of Bitcoin goes up and down. And she like did it. It is kind of an amazing story, but
It is incredible. I mean, honestly, that's the thing I was thinking as we were starting this live stream. You know that meme where it's like, he didn't cry at the Titanic. Oh my God, do boys even have emotions?
Yeah.
And then it's the yes, Chad, and he's like sobbing. And I feel like the perfect caption for this is like he's now like Ross can finally hug his mother again. It's like that's the thing that honestly sends me about this. When I was talking to my wife about it, I was like, Trump pardoned Ross. Now like you know, her watch is over. Lynn Ulbricht can rest and actually spend time with her son again. It's incredibly touching because she was indefatigable about her pursuit of her son's freedom. She showed up at conferences in Bitcoin, libertarian conferences. She interfaced with politicians and Ross's wife too in managing that X account for him. They would literally take letters that Ross wrote to them, and they would
a lot of people don't know
them.
that. Like you saw a tweet from Ross that was a letter that he wrote them from prison,
and then they would transcribe it and tweet about it. And like shout out to his wife. That woman has titanic levels of patience, and the fact that she stayed with this man with no hope, like zero hope, until this last election cycle, which I think is like a huge dark horse too. I don't think anyone in 2016, right, would have fathomed that Trump in his second term would do something like this. And it obviously endeared him to very many Bitcoiners and libertarian proponents alike. One quote here that I have from Lynn, Ross's mother, from that article I wrote. I'll just read these last 2 paragraphs. Even with its progenitor in jail, the online underground market model that Ulbricht initiated persists and still does today. When one goes down, another and another and another takes its place, as one would expect in a free market. Lynn Ulbricht told Bitcoin Magazine that this free market is precisely what her son envisioned, emboldened by the libertarian philosophy that willed it into existence and has always been central to the cryptocurrency it leveraged. Quote, I think Ross's motivation in creating Silk Road was to provide a truly free market that was private and used Bitcoin, as he saw the potential for monetary freedom that Bitcoin provided, she said. Even the sentencing judge said she knew he created the site for philosophical reasons. She just wasn't convinced he had given up that philosophy and felt justified in condemning him to die in prison for it. I think that last part is super interesting. It's like the philosophical case for this marketplace was always at the heart of the story, Even the judge, according to Lynn Ulbricht, recognized that. And it goes back to what you were saying about the forums. Like the Silk Road is more than a marketplace; it's a statement. It's a flag in the ground, right?
It really is. I'm trying to figure out which of the many DPR quotes I want to read, given that it is like this statement and flag in the ground, and why it is this kind of revered thing in this moment in the Bitcoin story, but really more in just like the modern digital world. It really is like the capstone, almost like the epilogue of the cypherpunk movement in the 90s. It's
Mm,
like, and then the marketplace happened, and
right.
then it began to be mainstream, and even the people who participated in this do not know like the shoulders on this on the giants of which they stand. But uh here's yeah, on here's a quote in response to on DPR's excitement at Silk Road's success. You'll have to wait for my memoirs for the juicy details. LOL. I've got some stories though. I'll tell you. One thing that goes through my head when Silk Road goes through a growth spurt, like after the first Gawker article, is that sound effect from Inception or the intense music from the new Tron movie. It gives me this sensation. Holy shit, this is epic. And then he started a book club on the server. They were typically covering devoted to Austrian economics and libertarianism. Uh, and then uh, he, which one was I gonna say? Um, he had a lot of thoughts about like minimum wage and private property and like state-run police, which is funny because I don't really think I agree with those. But there's one about money that he had, which I think is one of my favorites of all time. Um, he says, okay, on financial motivations and whether DPR founded Silk Road for the money, as another user claims. Ross Ulbricht said, money is one motivating factor for me. If it wasn't, I wouldn't impose a commission on trades or require vendors to use the Silk Road payment processor. Money motivates me for two reasons. For one, I have basic human needs that money allows me to meet, so I may devote time to our cause. I also enjoy a few first world pleasures that I feel I have earned, but nothing extravagant. In fact, compared to most I know, I still live quite frugally. I buy better food at the grocery store now and got some new clothes. I'm more generous with my friends and loved ones, but I've always been a cheap ass. Um, More importantly, money is powerful and it's going to take power to affect the kind of changes I want to see. Money allows us to expand our infrastructure and manpower to accommodate the growing demands of the market and pursue paths that complement and strengthen what's already there. My primary devotion is not personal wealth, but making a difference. Crazy. Does not sound like a kingpin to me.
It doesn't sound like a kingpin to me. Also, a very practical answer. I think it's really funny when anyone says, "Oh, well, you're doing this for the money." It's like, does anyone not do anything to satisfy needs and basic, desires?
Yeah. And that was in 2012. That was towards the end of 2020, 2012, where I think, you said he probably raked in under the Silk Road like $9 to $10 million.
Yeah, he made
$4 million.
millions of dollars from the Silk
Yeah.
Road, all of which was stolen from him. And it would be legendary if Trump signed an executive order to give it back. He won't do that. I'm sure Ross is happy just to have his freedom back. And, Lord knows he's about to be showered with gifts from the Bitcoin and libertarian communities, right? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see donations on par or greater than like what Andreas Antonopoulos received a few years back when he basically said that he was broke because he spends all of his time traveling proselytizing people into the Bitcoin fold. One last thing about what you just said, the Ross Ulbricht memoir is going to go fucking hard.
Bro.
That is going to go. I so hope that he actually
There is
does
one thing
something.
I if we could count on one thing, because we can't expect him to come join the Bitcoin discussion or the crypto discussion. He doesn't have to do anything. He could be like the Ron Paul where he shows up and like talks about liberty, doesn't mention Bitcoin or crypto. But please, and I think this is gonna happen. You just know it. He's gonna write a memoir and it's gonna be a banger
Yeah.
because he's a great writer. He's a
Yeah, he is.
wonderful writer.
Yeah, he is, and he's no doubt had publishing houses probably already knocking down his door trying to get the rights to a book like that. And I think something that Shinobi tweeted, I think this week, really bears highlighting here, at least for Bitcoiners. It's like, give the man some space. He has had 12 years, almost, 11 to 12 years of nothing but despair in prison. Now he's free. Give him some breathing room. He'll definitely probably make a circuit at some point to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Could be wrong. I don't know anything about him. I feel like there's a story to be told here, though, and he's probably going to tell it at some point. But Lord only knows when that'll be. I mean, we were kind of talking before we hopped on here, Charlie. I just think this is what drives it home for me. Think about spending 11 years in like what, 8x8 room and having like solitary confinement at times, and then coming home to your own bed and being able to wake up and move to multiple rooms around your house and having the freedom to do whatever you want without having to ask permission. That just kind of is a culture shock that most people don't appreciate and will never know, thankfully.
Yeah, there's so many things that have changed. One funny thing, and I'm probably going to tweet this after we hop off here, which is I had to check myself because I was trying to make sure I wasn't imagining this. Grand Theft Auto 5 came out on September 17th, 2013. Ross was still a free man. Grand Theft Auto 6, the most anticipated video game in human history, is coming out September 2025.
Wow.
We have not gotten a Grand Theft Auto while Ross has been imprisoned. We got Ross out before we got Grand Theft Auto 6. It's a banger tweet.
It is a banger tweet. That's pretty interesting. I'm trying to think of other video games that were new at that time, like Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, we've had at least 10 Calls of Duty. We had the Fortnite years. We've had half a generation Zoomers come in.
And a number of dark web marketplaces to fill Silk Road's place. Speaking of which, I'm seeing a tweet here about one of these rugging. Holy shit, God, dude. This one stole like hundreds of millions of dollars. Are you seeing this?
Yeah.